It's Sunday night in Washington, approaching bedtime over there, but there may be a few people not sleeping terribly well there tonight. Among them, perhaps President Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn, or the President's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. They're certainly near the top of most lists as the US political establishment and the US media await the first charges arising from Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Those charges remain sealed until tomorrow. Once they're unsealed, what then? I asked CNN's legal analyst, Michael Zeldin.
What happens next, procedurally, is they unseal the indictment, the arrest warrant is executed, meaning the person is either arrested, handcuffed and taken off, or their lawyer is called and they're given an opportunity to surrender voluntarily. They appear before a magistrate judge who reads to them the charging document, the indictment, and advises them of their rights to counsel and remain silent and the like. And then they set the case down for a time in the future, not too long, where the individual comes back and enters a plea of guilty or not guilty. So that's procedurally what will happen once the indictment is unsealed. With respect to how big is this news? Well, it's big because it's an indictment, but the bigness, if you will, of it depends on who's indicted and for what.
I know you're being asked to read the tea leaves, and it's really tough, but you're suggesting that the name in the folder might be Manafort. Is that your sense?
Well, no, I'm not suggesting that it may be Manafort. What I'm suggesting is that if you try to read tea leaves here, what you can remember is that the inquiry as to Manafort and his taxes and his representation of the Ukraine, as well as Flynn and his taxes and representation of Turkey, were cases that sort of began before Mueller took over as special counsel. So those cases were further along in the pipeline. And so one can speculate that because they were further along in the pipeline, they may be the first logical cases to reach the indictment stage. But that's all one can do. It might be completely different than that, but that's how people have come to think about Manafort and Flynn as possible first candidates for indictment. The fact that they've indicted somebody is a significant indication to everybody who is in the ecosystem of this investigation, be on notice that Mueller is a serious fellow who views evidence, and when he sees evidence of criminal wrongdoing, he has no hesitation to indict and charge people for that wrongdoing. So if anyone had the misimpression that this was not a serious investigation, then I think an indictment proves otherwise.
You worked as a special assistant to him. This is extraordinary, when he was director of the FBI. And
I worked for him. Just sorry to interrupt. I worked for him when he was the Assistant Attorney General in the Criminal Division of the United States Department of Justice. So that was a job that he held prior to the FBI, and that was the chief criminal prosecutor in the United States.
And what's he like? Because I'm looking at Donald Trump's Twitter feed. I'm looking at the pressure on him to resile from actually really hitting home. And I'm thinking, by God, you must be a formidable kind of character. He must be tenacious, and he must be tough, and he must be grounded in something deeply ethical.
That's all true. And I think he derives that from his service in the Marines to start. So he was a Marine, I think volunteered for the Marines, and in Vietnam, and then served in law enforcement ever since. So he is a self-contained, serious prosecutor. And I don't think that for a moment the political barbs that may be thrown at him, whether it be from the president or from Capitol Hill, matter to him one whit.
He is a self-contained, serious prosecutor who was up against the President of the United States. Now, that's simplistic of me and almost a little bit glib, but the pressure being applied from the White House is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Yes, but not vastly different than what we saw, for example, when President Clinton was under the scrutiny of a special counsel, or when even Ronald Reagan was under the scrutiny of a special counsel in the Iran-Contra case. So when there's an allegation of wrongdoing that reaches the Oval Office and a special prosecutor is appointed, then everybody sits up straight in their chairs because it's a serious matter and no one can take it lightly.
It's CNN's legal analyst, Michael Zeldin.